Hi everyone, I'm Gentry. I hope you guys are having a good week. Let me just dive right into this. I chose Mark 1:1 for the essay assignment, and the ESV reads, "The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God." And you can see the UBS 5 below that, and you can see huiotheu is in parentheses, and that's kind of the crux of the argument. Some people argue that it's original, other people argue that no, it was added by scribes to make the scriptures conform to their orthodox beliefs, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. But that's kind of why I chose it, and that's kind of why the argument is there. But anyway, you can see the variants listed here. There's 5 of them in the UBS 5. I'll go into those a little more detailed here in a little bit. But just a reminder, the eclectic methodology I'll be using, the earliest, most geographically widespread, and most non-related text types that support a reading, that reading will be a little bit stronger or much stronger. And internal evidence, we'll look at some transcriptional and intrinsic evidence as well. To start with, variants 2, 3, and 5 are pretty weak, and variants 1 or 4 are the stronger ones by far. So I'm going to cover variants 2, 3, and 5 and get them out of the way at the beginning. You can see variant 2 adds that extra article 2 in front of theou. Now, this is almost entirely supported by the Byzantine tradition and the minuscules, and in fact, one of the majuscules, Alexandrinus, that supports this reading, it's actually a Byzantine text type as well. So really, it's only supported mainly by the Byzantine type tradition. And also, Peterhead comments that, the Byzantine style is to add extra articles, and nobody really debates this. So really, the evidence isn't very strong at all for this variant as compared to 1 or variant 4. Variant 3, instead of God, it's Lord at the end, Kyriou. And this is only tested by 1 minuscule. And as Wasserman points out, it's probably a confusion of anomina sacra. And so really this is a very weak reading as well. Variant 5 is the shortest reading, and it's only attested by minuscule 28. And remember 28, because that'll be important later, because it actually helps to support the longer reading in a roundabout way. And then Irenaeus also admits Jesus also even shortens it even more. We'll talk a little bit about that. But variant 1 is one of the main ones. It's the long reading. It's supported by Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, Beza, Washingtoninus, and that gives an Alexandrian, Western, and Byzantine support to it. Irenaeus is the earliest father to quote it, but it's in Latin. But nonetheless, it does show Son of God. And mostly the Latin Church Fathers, Jerome, Severian is the first Greek citation. And the versional support also is mostly Western, Old Latin, Vulgate, and so forth. Variant 4 is a short reading. It's also supported by Sinaiticus, Coridethi, and then minuscule 28 again. Remember that one. Origen is the earliest to quote this one, and even though it's not as early as Irenaeus, this one by Origen is actually in Greek instead of Latin, so that's interesting. Irenaeus does quote the shorter reading one time, and some people argue that it's a truncation. Peterhead doesn't believe that, but I don't think it's very founding, because if what Irenaeus was reading was the manuscript in front of him, it's such a short reading that it's not really attested to anywhere else. Victorinus, Basil, those guys also support it. As far as versional support, it's pretty slim. You got Sahidic, Coptic, and Palestinian, so not a whole lot. Just a quick summary again. Variant 1 has Alexandrian, Western, and Byzantine. It's got a wide variety. Patristic and versional, it's mostly Western. Variant 4, you do have Alexandrian, Caesarean, and an independent one. And the patristic is some Western, some Eastern. Now, for which one's stronger, I would have to say variant 1, because it's hard to tell whether Sinaiticus, if you should take the original reading or the corrected one. And so if you just set it aside and look at what's left, variant 1 still has an Alexandrian witness and Vaticanus, and then a Western and Byzantine, whereas variant 4 only has a Caesarean and a independent witness, and they're actually quite a bit later. So I would argue variant 1 is stronger in the external evidence by quite a bit, or by some anyway. But since there's enough evidence out there to show that it was circulating, it's important to look at some of the internal evidence as well. So the first one, transcriptional evidence, homoi teleuton. It's a similar, it's an omission of a word due to similar endings of a word, previous to it. And so you can see a possible exemplar of Sinaiticus. You have 6 words with a genitive ending, and how confusing that might be for somebody to, skip some words because they look at one ending, write something, and go back and pick up at the ending of the next word or the next 2 words. And similarly below, you can see the nomina sacra. You can see where you might skip some words. Now, Ehrman He doesn't buy it. And other people don't agree with that as well. But Ehrman is pretty outspoken, and leading up to his attack, or not attack, but leading up to his argument against that view, he kind of boasts about the early and widespread support for the shorter reading. And therefore, if the shorter reading comes from the longer reading, you would expect to see this error of omission due to similar endings. You would expect to see that in different scribes in different places and so forth. And he also says, we don't even see this in the later Byzantine tradition. We don't see them making this mistake at all. But there's a couple things with that. First, though, it's interesting. This is where minuscule 28 comes in. One of the minuscules that supports a shorter reading does so because it is a correction of a similar error. So in the original, they left out Christ, but in the correction, they added it in there, and it looks like it was due to an omission due to similar endings. Further, the Institute for New Testament Textual Research chose Mark 1:1 as one of their case tests, and they found several Byzantine witnesses, supporting the shorter reading. So as Wasserman points out, this is opposed to Ehrman's argument because these were committed by later Byzantine scribes. And the data shows they're not immediately related to each other, so this was happening in different places as well. And since they're Byzantine, Puiu Theu was likely in the exemplar. And so this just kind of goes against Ehrman's arguments that, this didn't happen in the past and it didn't happen in the future. Well, 28 shows it happened in the past, and all these Byzantines showed that it happened later as well. Another argument by Ehrman is, well, why would we see this mistake at the very beginning of the verse? You'd think a scribe would finish Matthew and then go get refreshed, maybe take a day off, and then be ready to go, and he'd be much more attentive at the beginning of Mark. Well, this is an assumption, and, I can make an assumption saying something completely different. But as far as data goes, Wasserman points to 4 different cases where at the beginning in the very first book of different documents where they do leave out words that have a genitive ending on them. So twice in 2 Corinthians 1:1, Titus 1:1, 1 Peter 1:1. So this just shows that this did happen. It wasn't, common, but it did happen. Now, being that they say that it was more likely added than omitted, they also give reasons for that. This goes back to Tischendorf, and he's more general, with his reasons for adding it. Whereas Ehrman says, well, it's to, combat the adoptionist viewpoint where, Jesus wasn't Christ or wasn't God until he was baptized. Well, his argument's interesting, but Max Bottner kind of points out that it's not as strong as he makes it out to be. And I'm getting close to time, so Bottner essentially looks at Irenaeus' quotes and Origen's quotes as well, and several other early church fathers, and shows that there were a few times where they used Mark 1:1 to support the deity of Christ, but a lot of the time, if not most of the time, they were using Mark 1:1 for an argument. It was actually to tie together the Old Testament and the New Testament. They weren't even arguing about the deity of Christ. So to say that that the early patristic, fathers added this to fight against the adoptionist viewpoint isn't necessarily founded. Now, you can't prove this either way, but Bottner really does pretty well in showing that Ehrman's argument isn't as strong as it really is. Now, considering intrinsic evidence for Jewish writings, several books have, son of somebody or son of, so-and-so, and even Matthew has that as well. So really, it's not odd that Mark would start out this way. As far as if it's the style of Mark, all throughout Mark, he's referring to Christ's deity and, his relationship with the Father and so forth. And so really, it does fit. So the intrinsic evidence doesn't necessarily prove anything, but it does kind of lean a little bit towards the longer reading. Oh, and there's also the calendar in honor of Caesar Augustus. That was by Craig Evans, and he thought maybe Mark had the same idea in mind. I don't know if I'm completely convinced on that one. But in conclusion, I would say that the longer reading, variant 1, is the stronger and most likely original. And the reasons for that is it does have the strongest external evidence and earliest external evidence and the most different text types. The transcriptional evidence, to me, is not conclusive for the shorter reading. Now, it doesn't disprove it. It doesn't disprove the longer reading, but, especially since the date is a little bit different than what Ehrman says, I just don't think that it's conclusive. And also the intrinsic evidence, I don't believe is conclusive for the shorter reading either. really it boils down to the external evidence was stronger and the internal evidence was not enough to overturn the external evidence. So anyway, I'm just barely over time, but any comments or questions, I welcome, and thanks for watching my video, and God bless you guys.